and I'll get us started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am so thrilled, so excited, so grateful to be sharing this time with my next guest and having a beautiful conversation with the one and only Stefano Stefandos. He has over 20 years of direct experience in the personal transformation space. He is a world-renowned, very well sought after trainer and educator and relationship expert with a background in behavioral science. He really understands peak human potential, and he is passionate about leading people closer to their highest potential and to each other. He is passionate about philosophies that merge the Eastern and Western methodologies and promotes spiritual balance and empowers people in their lives and in their love. Uh, from trauma release to navigating at times the murky waters of modern masculinity, to helping women understand the men in their lives, he helps people escape negative patterns and cultivate positive sense of self. Stefanos has also co-founded both a world-class coaching and educational institute and global men's empowerment movement, and has been involved in multiple 8 and 9-figure startups. Stefanos has worked with thousands of men and women from all walks of life, special forces soldiers, Olympic gold medalists, elite fighters, and everyday people, and have all relied on him to restructure and reframe their relationships with themselves and their loved ones. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. I appreciate being here.
Can you tell us a little bit about your life's journey? What led you to working so deeply with humanity in this way?
Yeah, when I was, I think maybe about 5 or 6 years old, and I'd watch TV with my grandparents, and I would see um, National Geographic. I'd watch National Geographic, and they would watch a lot of foreign shows and news and so forth, and I would look at that and I would see the United Nations and I would ask a lot of questions. I was very curious as a kid. I was very shy and timid, but I was very curious. I'd ask a lot of questions around what is the United Nations? What do they actually do? And the way I understood it back then as a kid was this global government that looks after everyone and that wants the best for everyone, and that helps kids that are impoverished and that are fighting disease and famine, and that live in extreme poverty and so forth. And I thought to myself, well, I want to be the leader of the United Nations, right? Like, I didn't have the words United Nations Secretary General, but I wanted to be the leader of this organization. I wanted to help those people that were suffering. And so that was really born from a place of violence and disparity in my own household, and feeling very disconnected from my parents, not really feeling safe as a kid. I was wetting the bed until probably 8 or 9 years old, just from fear of my father, fear of my parents fighting a lot, and just the violence and the unpredictability, the volatility in my home. And so as a result of that, I just wanted to help other kids like me. I guess I didn't have the language of how do I help myself. I'd pray to God every night, but it didn't seem to help. It never changed anything. And so I didn't know how to help myself. So, and I didn't think that was working. I actually remember very distinctly. I can't remember how old I was, but I remember the moment. I remember where I was in my grandparents' home, and I was praying to God, and I said, "Fuck you, God! I'm never praying to you again. You're just not helping me." And I really, I didn't pray for many, 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 many years, like 3 decades maybe. Um, it was a very, very interesting time. And so this need to want to serve others, it's also, if you follow human design as a way to understand our patterning and our personalities and our expressions and our proclivities and values and so forth, it's very much embedded in my human design that I am of service, right? Like I find and create and generate worthiness and a sense of self and meaning through service to others, and through being in the world in that way. And so there's probably some of that there as well, depending on, and I know that's embedded in some level of astrology. I'm not completely convinced on astrology, but I am more convinced on older, ancient astrological systems and the connectedness of everything, right? Probably a little bit beyond me, but at the moment, but it's very fascinating. And so that need was really, I don't say always there, but there from a very, very young age. I'm 40 years old now. So, 35 years or so it's been there with me. Now, as an adult, I immediately gravitated towards social sciences, psychology, philosophy, behavioral science, understanding how trauma is trapped in the body, how do we release trauma, somatic therapies, ancient wisdom and ancient spiritual practices. Because I like to go back to the source and the root of whatever we're doing in modernity. Where did that come from? Like, what are the multiple disciplines that have formed this one discipline that is 10 years old or 20 years old that is taking the world by storm? Because it's rooted in something that is very archaic. For me, I'm deeply, deeply aligned with, my heritage, my cultural heritage is Greek Italian, but I'm very deeply aligned with the Vedics and Sanskrit and the Upanishads and Vedantic philosophy, specifically Advaita Vedanta, non-dual philosophy. And so, I just have this yearning to learn and to grow and so forth. Now, whilst throughout my late teens and adult life, I had been in this space of service and coaching, and I really had my first client in neuro-linguistic programming and counseling and hypnosis when I was maybe like 22. So I've been doing this for quite some time. What really allowed me to step into my dharma and to really be very purposeful and very clear with who I was a breakup that I had in my very early 30s, which became the catalyst for me to go deeper into my own shadow, to explore myself in ways that I just hadn't before, and to come into deeper communion with parts of me that I had been repressing and suppressing and neglecting and numbing for many, many years from my childhood, because I just was unable and unwilling to look at them. And that was the coming into a deeper communion with my soul and with my shadow in ways that I could have never imagined. But that was deeply transformative, that propelled me onto the path that I'm on today, and the life that I'm living today, and the way that I think and feel, and has really been amplified by that particular experience, and has allowed me to just be the person that I am today.
What a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And I really, really want to thank you for your noting the Vedas and Vedic science as the root and the source of all of this work that so many are doing, and kind of labeling something else, which is great when we can create our own methods. But I think far too often people don't cite the sources. And so really from my heart, I commend you for that and thank you for that. And I'm also Greek and Italian, so two
Love
Stephs
that.
hanging out.
Yeah.
Can you define radically honest love for us, since that's what we're talking about? How do you see radically honest love, and how would you define it?
Yeah, for me, it's being in communion with all parts of ourselves. Now, at some level, that's potentially an impossibility, but that shouldn't stop us from exploring or exploration. And so is can we embrace the uncomfortable and the undesirable as we would embrace the desirable and the comfortable? So for example, if we're out and we're single and we see someone that we are physically sexually attracted to, and then all of a sudden we start thinking about being intimate with that person, whether it's emotional intimacy or physical intimacy, and we start talking to them, and there's novelty and variety there. And you can see I'm building a picture here of this is pretty exciting. This can be very exciting, right? Or similarly, if you're in a relationship and you're celebrating your 10-year anniversary and you are deeply connected to your partner and you've got this amazing trip planned for them, and you're going to go away to Bora Bora for 10 days and whatever it may be, like equally, that is something that is desirable and beautiful, and it's a sensory explosion and experience. Can we meet the uncomfortable the way that we would meet something like that? And that may look like we've just gone through a breakup. We've just lost all our money. We just got fired from our job. Now, I'm not saying be happy. I'm not saying spiritually bypass. Definitely fucking not. Please don't do that. In fact, don't. But be with the big feelings, the uncomfortable feelings of jealousy or anger or rage or fear that are coming up. Because what we often do is we suppress, repress, and we deny ourselves of feeling that and moving it through our bodies. And so for me, radically honest love is loving all parts of ourselves, all of them, even the inconvenient parts. And that is an immersion into the shadow, but it's not only an immersion into the shadow. It is also an embracing of our light. Is it an embracing of our joy, of our play, of our fun? That is our birthright as well, that Dionysian approach to life, right? And so can we embrace both equally? That to me is radically honest love.
Mm, I love that. I love that definition. You know, the discomfort is just as much of a miracle as the pleasure.
Yep. Beautifully said in
Mm.
far less words than I. I love that.
No, but yours were far more passionate, so I appreciate it for the context of this. And you know, you're such a great speaker, and I think that you are able to really put these terms into um, very understandable, accessible language, but without losing the mysticism and the romance of it. And so I think that that's a really beautiful quality
Mm,
that you give.
thank you.
Um, you talk a lot about the father wound. Can you share with us what the father wound is for people who may not know? And does everyone have one?
Yeah. I don't think everyone has one. I think many do. Percentage, I don't know. If you're one of those people that needs a statistic, not you specifically, Stephanie, but those that are listening, it needs a statistic or a very clear definition, a mathematical definition. I don't know what that is. Firstly, the father wound is not a formal diagnosis or a formal psychological diagnosis or term. It is more of it's not pseudoscience by any means or pseudopsychology, but it is more a way to understand a developmental trauma or a developmental wound that we experience as children directly related to our fathers or father figures, right? And so what it generally looks like is not being enough, not feeling enough, seeking validation and approval from our fathers, consciously and or unconsciously. So again, for example, your father wasn't available. So the unavailable father figure either worked too much or your parents divorced early and he could be physically unavailable, he works away, could be emotionally unavailable and emotionally distant. And we crave that approval. We crave to be seen by our fathers because as boys, and I'll speak to girls as well, but as boys, we want to be in the image of our fathers. Right? You think about this when we're children, we deify our parents, we pedestalize them. And so we want to be in the image of the gods that we pedestalize, particularly the father figure. And so as boys, we crave that and we yearn that. And if we don't have that, we make really big noise in the world to try and get their attention. And so we don't wake up in the morning consciously thinking, I want my father's attention. Let me go do something really big, like jump off the roof with my BMX and see, whatever it may be, or let me go rob a convenience store, whatever it is. But we do this, like we start seeking adrenaline, we start pushing the edges. Now, physiology and adolescence and inadequate rites of passage are all connected to this as well, but not having stability, not having a safe structure as a father in our lives, a fixture that sets boundaries, it disrupts the way we see ourselves and what we actually think we desire. And so we just constantly, everything we're doing is we're seeking the approval of this father figure. So for women, so for boys, it's we look to our fathers to figure out what kind of man we want to be. For girls, we look to our fathers to figure out, really define our self-worth, like and how we're going to attract and magnetize love and intimacy into our lives, irrespective of what your sexual orientation is. But we look to that father figure for that safety and that structure and what to expect from the men in our communities and in our lives. And so when we have that father wound, we're not healthy in that connection. We crave from a place of lack, inadequacy, in self-imposed insecurity. We crave from a place of not being enough. We crave from a place of I'm not good enough. I am not worthy. And so we have to do really big things, extreme things to either numb the pain, because the bigger the pain, the bigger the pleasure needs to be, or to try and distract us and just numb us from feeling such an emptiness within ourselves.
Yeah, that's powerful. And you know, you talk about sort of, you know, men hurting women. You know, before we started this conversation, you're telling me about an amazing program that we'll talk about more at the end. But you know, how many women have been inflicted by sort of male wounds, and how these have also created a history for men hurting women that they then feel this difficulty about in their lives. How can a man start to overcome some of that and do some of that work?
Yeah. Unfortunately, more often than not, and this has been very, very true from my experience. So I'm mindful not to project here, right? And I've just worked with just thousands and thousands of people over the years that I see patterns. I mean, our brains are pattern recognizing machines. I've just harnessed that more and more over the years because it's my craft and it's where I spend so much of my time. And I'm also mindful not to project my personal bias and my personal experience as well. Unfortunately, what I was going to say, I cut myself off, was we often don't learn, and this isn't true for everyone, just I'd say for most men, we don't learn without hitting rock bottom or our version of rock bottom. And so what that tangibly looks like is we leave a train wreck or train wrecks of relationships behind us. You know, we cheat, we hurt others, we're not vulnerable, we don't open up, we stonewall, we criticize harshly, we're stuck in our rage and anger, we project our own pain onto our partners. And then when we break up because the compound effect of that relationship no longer serves us, or it's too much pain, there's not enough pleasure, you know, we scrap it, we scrap it to, well, that just didn't work out. You know, we weren't a match, as opposed to actually doing the deeper work. But when we hit rock bottom in such a way that opens our hearts and opens our minds, and even brings back memories of, or thoughts or feelings or sensations of unresolved trauma that becomes so real we can't unsee it. It's like dragons don't exist. They do and they don't, but dragons don't exist, right? But then if you see a dragon and you're not tripping out on LSD or something else, but you see a dragon, like I'm looking out my side of my window now and I just see a dragon, like I can't unsee that. All things being equal, right? Like I can't unsee that. And so, but it's completely shattering my reality. It's like, well, no, dragons don't exist. How is this possible?
Right.
Similarly with shadow work, or similarly with doing our inner work and coming to that place of, oh, I need to change. For me, I want to change for me because I don't want to hold on to this baggage and I don't want this thick armor on me anymore. Generally comes, and it doesn't always have to be like this, but this is the world we live in. And you look to the world and you see what's happening. You see the disconnection, the disparity, and the extremity. You see global leaders saying, essentially, if you're this, then fuck you. If you're not, and not to bring in what's happened the last couple of years, but if you're not with us, then you're against us. Yeah. And in different ways, like there's both sides of the they're all, it's all the same. There's this disparity that's being created. And so until we experience that internal extreme separation of what our old self was identified with to what it could be identified with, we won't change. It doesn't need to be like that. It isn't always like that. It's often like that. Now, here's the thing though, that is very, very uncomfortable. And uncomfortable isn't a word that does this justice. It is fucking terrifying. In fact, it feels like we're dying. To come face to face with this part of our ego, this part of our identity, that no longer now is asking us to no longer associate with unconscious, unresolved stuff, and to actually do our inner work, which is face the whole of who we are, right? And then there's obviously nuances and layers to that. So because our body does not want to do that, our ego does not want to do that, so much of us does not want to do that, we do everything we can to avoid it. And so we hit a rock bottom, what do? We'll go snort cocaine, we'll go on a holiday, we'll go seek adrenaline, you know, heli skiing or whatever it may be. We'll jump into another relationship. We'll work really, really hard and make more money and elevate our status. And so we're in this constant cycle of avoidance. And so there's no individual healing that can be done without reconciliation and awareness and ownership of self. And therefore there's definitely no collective healing that can be done. And that is an unfortunate or fortunate reality, depending on what your vantage point is. But until we face our stuff as individuals, forget about even as a collective, we won't be able to face it as a collective. And familiarity goes a long way here. So I'm of the belief that men and women definitely need to come together to heal collective masculine, feminine wounds. And they do go both ways, by the way. However, the more prominent and dominant source, and at least what appears to be and is at some level source of pain, has been inflicted by the masculine energetic and men. The two different things are connected at the same time. We will struggle to come together as men and women. There's too much risk, too much pain, too much shame to come together, particularly from men, to come together to heal that. We have to do our own individual work. quote unquote separate. Men with men, women with women. Elevate ourselves to a certain point. And I don't want to use a linear hierarchy, but just for educational purposes, elevate ourselves to a certain point of authenticity, vulnerability, awareness, emotional, sexual intelligence, healed past traumas, etc. Then we can come together. Otherwise, you've got premature coming together. You've got, toddlers sitting with 12-year-olds attempting to understand what the 12-year-old is saying. Not going to happen. And I'm not saying that women are more advanced than men in any capacity. In some areas, absolutely. And it goes the other way as well. But what I'm saying is that we can't come together in the ways that we really idealistically would like to, in a utopian way, until we do our individual work together. Men need to be witnessed by other men. There are too many men walking around with those father wounds that haven't had appropriate rites of passage from boyhood into adulthood. The word teenager and adolescence is really, it's a new term. So it's not an old term. You're a boy or you're a man. That's it. Like, and the transition between boyhood and manhood is very deliberate, which we miss in modern society, in a Western culture, particularly. So until we can really be witnessed, and we can go through that rites of passage at 50 years of age. I have boys that are 60 years old, 50 years old coming to me. So, and working with these men, boys in men's bodies.
Yes.
So until we can go through that rites of passage and really clear a substantial amount of shame, we will be in constant hiding and we'll be hyper protective. And so it's worthless. That's maybe strong. It's near worthless to come together with all of us and try and heal this thing before we can go deeper within ourselves and in familiar genderized context.
Yes. And I think, that's so profound and such an important message, Steph, because I think, we've been in sort of spiritual communities for a while. I've been around the globe witnessing different spiritual communities coming together. And it's definitely, there's definitely this thread of patterns that I see as a pattern seeker myself, of men in these communities who are bypassing the work and taking advantage of women, this, spiritual fuckboy. I know you've done posts about that character, that person. I'd love to hear your take on that. But, do you kind of maybe associate this with men kind of stepping into this spiritual circles to seek some sort of relief, to seek some sort of, intelligence and wisdom, but they're still sort of not been initiated properly, or there's not that deeper work happening with them alone with men. So it becomes pervasive within those communities that women are extracted from.
Just as an FYI, I've spent time in Thailand, a fair amount of time in Thailand, a fair amount of time in the tantric communities in Thailand. And most of the men there are really fucking broken. In fact, most people that delve deep into these communities are actually they're not broken, but they carry a sense of brokenness. And that to me is a very clear reality based on the shit that goes down there. So I'll put that there. So three types of men that come to these communities, right? It is the man that is the manipulator, that sees, there are a lot of women here that are open or broken or hurt, and I can take advantage of them, right? The other type of man is the man that is genuinely seeking transformation and has aligned with a spiritual path. And in doing so, has been diligent in his research and says, the Eastern path is maybe for me. Let me explore that. So carries very sincere intentions, carries wounds, carries hurt, is aware of his hurt, is aware of his wounds, is aware of his pain, is aware of his character, isn't really hiding anything, is genuinely there to just want to grow. So these men exist. They very much exist. Oh. And then there is the man that is not manipulative, but is lost, is stuck in his feminine energetic and just wants to go with the flow, just wants to go with the next best thing, the next new thing, is chasing novelty and variety, doesn't really have a grounded sense of himself, is seeking validation outside of himself, is seeking his sense of purpose, sense of worth, way outside of himself, of the imbalance is way off as opposed to more internal, hasn't really grasped masculine principles of being, doesn't mean any harm, isn't malicious like the first kind of man that I mentioned, isn't unhealthily seductive, just wants to have fun, wants to play, very innocent, very, very Peter Pan, boy-like energy, right? So there are three types of men that I see that go to these. I mean, there are obviously a few more, but the three main types that go to these spiritual community. I mean, you've probably spent more time there than me. Would you agree? Would you disagree? I'd love to hear your thoughts, actually.
I do. I agree, and I think a lot of what comes into play is what you said. Is this unhealed masculine, but then I'd really love to talk about the unhealed feminine and the
Mm,
mother wound and how it relates to the father wound, right? I've found with the people that I've coached that typically the stronger the father wound, the stronger the mother wound. But the mother wound is the one that's not really being discovered because it's a bit more fashionable for us to hate our fathers these days.
yeah,
Um, I would love for you to talk about that because I think a lot of it is this feminine imbalance that these men come to these communities because they are more comfortable around men because they've not been initiated into brotherhood, and so they trust women, they rely on women, but what they're actually doing is extracting from women, unintentionally often. I agree. And also really fearing that confrontation with their masculine side and what that
sure.
means. I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, it's a great topic to expand on. So some of these men that are coming, that are coming to these places, feel more comfortable with women because they've had that absent father, and so they've been raised by mothers, right? And healthy or unhealthy, they're very comfortable with women, but they've lost a sense of their own identity and they've lost a sense of their own selves. In traditional rites of passage, right or wrong, but in traditional rites of passage, over many different cultures, over thousands of years, we would see boys at some stage, and the ages would vary, but from anywhere from, say, 6 years old to 10 years old, they would be slowly moved or pulled away from their mother. Right? No, horrific. Well, sometimes actually would be a very abrupt way. Again, let's not comment on the efficacy of that right now, but just they would be moved away from their mother. Now, how their mother responded to that would really determine the type of man they became. Like if she was happy to let him go, or at least, which would be difficult for a mama, but really showed that, but really trusted the process that now he's moving towards being with dad and being with the men in the tribe, and he's going to learn certain things and he'll come back to me. That boy's transition would be different. If she was very resistant and maybe even manipulative, unconsciously, not even necessarily consciously, just unconsciously because of her own fear and pain, that boy would feel very torn. So there are men that come to these communities that just feel safe with women, and they're appeasing women. Now, the mother wound from the woman, from the females in these communities, is that lack of nurturing, lack of care, often narcissistic mother, or at least aspects of narcissism, hyper selfishness, self absorption, shaming her child, jealous of her daughter, right? And so these women come to these communities wanting to be a caretaker because they didn't experience being taken care of themselves. They didn't experience that nurturing themselves. But then they're attracting boys that need taken care of, which they don't want to do because you're in these communities, and let's call it, whether it's more traditional Tantra or Neo Tantra, you're in these communities to, at least in part, one of the, I would say, purposes is to develop a healthy sense of polarity within self and within your sexual intimacy with others. And so how you engage in healthy attraction dynamics, at least this would be an intention, right? How you behave in these relationships, how these relationships are often mirrors of our relationships to our parents, and how we have an opportunity to be different in these relationships. But we don't know that. We're not aware of that. So we keep playing out the same old patterns, which brings us the same old pain and the same old distress and the same old type of relationships. And so we're caught in this melting pot of fucking wounds and trauma, and we suffer for it. And I don't want to say all we need to do, because it's really not that easy. And I don't want to be facetious because it's very challenging intellectually to understand. All we need to do are make choices and immersive practices into healing our past, which is very confrontational. I get it. Like there's still things that I don't want to look at now as a man, like just as a human being, things about myself that I just don't want to look at because they're uncomfortable. But I don't give myself a choice these days.
Yeah. Well said. And so interesting, and so many layers to uncover. I'm
Oh,
curious just about staying on the mother wound for another
mm,
moment, if you don't mind. How does it show up in a man when he's had this narcissistic mother that you've described, where there was neglect there
mm.
from the feminine, um, or an expectation for him to perform in a certain way to receive love?
Yeah, exactly what you just said. He'll do that in his adult relationships. He'll become a people pleaser. He'll appease. He'll be passive. He won't be an authority in his own life. He won't be directional. He won't be assertive. I'm not talking about demanding. We're talking about, not talking about shadow light behavior. We're talking about just healthy attributes of the masculine. He will seek to prioritize others. He will minimize himself. He will maximize women. He will make them everything, make them his world. His whole self-worth is tied up in what his woman thinks of him. It
Mm,
becomes a deeply feminine orientated.
mm,
Not wrong or right, not awkward or not. It depends, like, is that really what he wants? If that's really what he wants and that's in alignment with his highest truth, some would say, and I would be more in this camp, that probably is a little quote unquote unnatural. Natural and unnatural being a product of culture, but also a product of biology, also a product of how we've evolved over millions of years in tribes. So there is a socio-cultural element there, but there's also a biological element there, a hormonal element there, right? A gonadal element there.
mm,
Even the symbolism in our sorry, the words eluded me, in our genitalia. Like you look at the you look at a man and you look at how a man uh inserts, how a man is directional, how a man penetrates. You see how a female opens and more poetic words surrenders per se,
mm,
right? There's a giving, there's a receiving. Now that does translate to how we see ourselves. So if we were to say that is quite natural, or that is quite healthy to at least be able to tap into that as a man, to tap into that masculine essence as a man. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that we don't. And let me actually clarify something too, and I'm sure many of your viewers know this, but just for context, masculine and feminine energetics are not solely tied to males and females. And they can be, but it's not exclusive. And so if we don't want to use masculine and feminine energetics, I know Michaela Boehm uses go and flow energy, do and be energy. There's active passive energy. There's giving and receiving energy. There's yang yin energy. There's so many different other words that we can use. We're just talking about polarity. We're talking about two wings of the same bird. We're talking about learning through distinction, which creates richness in our learning, which creates more profound learning, which allows us to elevate and evolve at deeper rates, right? It's like we have to make, it's the fucking paradox of life. Like we have to move through duality to recognize in very visceral ways that we are the undying, unchanging, unified observer, and there is no duality, right? But we have to move through, we have to create duality to realize there isn't duality.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
you and I clearly believe that. Others don't though, but that's okay. Like a dualistic Vedantin would say, not really. You're wrong. Here's why, which is fine. But that's my take on things. So the richness we create in separation, if you like, in distinction, is beautiful. But we demonize difference and we demonize distinction, and we make one better than the other. And again, I mentioned human design. I've been just getting into this a little more lately. Like I'm a generator, and 70% of the world is an example of generation, right? Or being a generator. And you can see it, like you can see the world that we've built for ourselves in this modern world, like the doing and the activity and the productivity, and it's imbalanced at the same time as well. It's too much. I look at my own life and how I play out things, and it's just, it's crazy. Like, but equally, I say that because we have prioritized a masculine way of doing things, and we've made that more valuable than the feminine way. I believe that's inaccurate and very detrimental to us. There's equity in both ways of being. However, we don't see that covertly and overtly in our society. And as a result of that, we cause not only separation and a demonizing in indifference, but we start stimulating resentment and anger and us versus them versus.
Yes.
That's the pain. Like, you are not, as a woman, I don't want to assume how you identify, but just as a woman, right? You're not my enemy. You can be, and I say this in a, I'll just say it, fuck it. You are my hero, as I can be your hero, the representation of that. We can be the heroes in each other's lives. Irrespective of how we treat each other, we can still be the heroes in each other's lives. I don't have to demonize you because of your gender, or because of your skin color, or because of your hair, or because of your age. Like, there's all these separations that we create, which are beautiful. The brain does that. That's what we do. We categorize separate things. But we layer this judgment on top of it. That's the fucking pain point, is the judgment.
Yes. And, this is also what my guru talks about so much. I'm so grateful that you brought that up. It also attaches us to our victimhood. But I'm separate than you. And the second we're saying, well, no, my pain though, or my experience, you don't know what it is to be me. So then you don't know what pain is, and our pleasure connects us so much, but we're all carrying around a ton of pain too. And there is no, my pain is more than yours. It's really, these are these differential points that we're always looking to separate. It's so ego driven, isn't it?
So much so. And I'm really grateful you brought up the victim, analogy there. I'll speak to it very briefly. You're so, from my perspective, you're so accurate when you say we bring this victim mentality in, and a victim cannot exist without a villain. And the victim and the villain cannot exist without a hero, because archetypically we need that. So we will create the villain, we will create the hero, and we will perpetuate that, especially if we believe consciously and or unconsciously that we are the victim. And that's even more separation and distinction. Oh, you're the villain, you're bad. You're not good for me. But what if actually that villain is good for you because they can teach you something? This is embracing the discomfort. It doesn't mean you're not honoring of self. It doesn't mean you don't set healthy boundaries and saying, hey, you don't cross this line. And if you do, here are the outcomes of that, the consequences of that. It just means though that we're ceasing to separate so in such a way that is just causing more and more separation, which I just had a thought then in real time. Isn't the universe expanding and stretching every moment? I believe it is, right? Like the physical universe is just constantly in this flux of expansion. And I almost see the way that we're almost in alignment with that, but I think in a misaligned way, where we're creating more and more separation amongst ourselves and we're stretching away from each other. But I don't think in the way that's intended. We're following suit of the universe or the physical universe, where I think we could be, and this is a very not fully fleshed out thought, so I think I'm not making sense here. But I'm just.
I love it. Let's expand the universe right now, Stefanos. It's expanding right now.
I'm gonna come back to that. I'll pause there. Maybe someone picked something up, but I don't know. I haven't fully fleshed that out yet. It was happening in real time.
I love this esoteric side of you. We'll have to revisit it. Within this understanding though of the masculine and feminine dynamic that we're kind of riffing on, there's this thing, this feminine testing thing. And from a man's perspective, what is feminine testing? How can you tell if a woman is testing you from her oracle, her wisdom, her love for you, or if a woman is testing from maybe her wounds?
Oh, okay. So firstly, I think it's very important to acknowledge that the feminine energetics within us will want to test and will want to push boundaries and expand like the natural structure. The river is going to want to, at some point with its sentience, is going to want to move beyond the riverbanks, right? And so it's not wrong or right, it just is. But how the feminine tests really, really matters. Is the feminine testing from a place where she's connected to her heart and she's in her wilderness or wildness from her heart. So she has a connection to herself, her sovereignty, and she's aware of what she's projecting or bringing into this space.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't mean that she's muted or that she's edited in any way. It means that she's connected to her heart. In other words, if she is coming from random, unconscious, unresolved trauma, massive projection, it is not for the masculine to hold that. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that that perpetuates her own violence towards herself and her violence towards the world. And it doesn't help her heal. It doesn't say, hey, I see a greater version of you and you're not being that right now. Just like when a woman puts her hand on a man's heart and says, if you don't temper your rage, I'm out. And not only am I out, you're disconnecting yourself more from who you truly are and who you truly can be. I'm just giving you two examples, right? It's like we have to, there's this, and I've done a post on this. I don't know when it will. I've got. I create a lot of content. I've got content for like the next 12 months. So I don't know when it will come out, but I did a post on this. I typed it out, wrote it the other day around the what was it? Jeez. The latest sort of feminine rage movement, right? And I'm a big proponent of tapping into all aspects of our emotional being, right? I think the shadow side of the feminine rage movement is that it's tapping into their shadow unconsciously and claiming that it's coming from a healthy place, where really it's projection and pain and unresolved hatred towards the masculine because they haven't resolved within themselves. And it's justified because of all the reasons why it would be justified. And I think that's unhealthy. I don't think that's the feminine being in her healthy storm. I think that's the feminine being in an uncontrollable expression of self, just like when the masculine is attempting to dominate, is autocratic, is oppressive. That's the masculine is controlling. That's the masculine in his unhealthy power. That's not healthy power. That's not being assertive. That's not being directional and clear. That's not making a stand for what he believes and being the thermotic man, that righteous self-indignation. No. So, I have an issue with these movements that arise that claim to be something when you sort of just peek a little further, a little deeper, the reality is they're coming from a really painful place. And they haven't healed so much within themselves, and it's a way to project and blame and not actually look inwards. And both men and women do this. It's not just a feminine rage movement. We all do this as human beings. We just don't want to look at our stuff. I addressed this earlier. It's too uncomfortable.
Yes. And I mean, and it also, I would say it's not inspiring to men to actually change. It's not healthy for us as feminine. It's not really us actually tapping into our true essence. I think rage and anger is a great exercise for women because so many women don't feel safe to express that. It's an unattractive
Agreed.
thing that's been suppressed. But to create that as an identity, goddess Kali, she is the raging, cutting, ego cutting goddess in the Hindu philosophy. And she is the goddess of the ashram that I attended. It was a Kali ashram. And so there's a lot of that energy around ego cutting, but she isn't meant to stay with us. She's meant to be a guide on this discovery through that darkness and through all of that pain. But as women, we have to transcend that to then be the peacekeepers and to be these equal partners and maybe the heroes in some way for the masculine to fall into that softness. And it's just kind of leading me to asking you about this confusion that a lot of this anger that women have creates with men, because on one hand, we're talking about really wanting this masculinity to come to the forefront more, this warrior man, if we want to talk about archetypes, and this essence of the masculine that's been oppressed a bit, and that benevolent warrior. And then at the same time, a lot of these spiritual movements are saying men should be more in touch with their feelings and be more in touch with their emotions and reach into their emotions, which is also amazing. But I would love to hear from you just a little bit of context around that, because I think sometimes there's maybe a misunderstanding, and men come into this work and there starts to become this influx of emotional understanding within himself, emotional expression. When is it good for a man to really, or what types of emotions are really good for men to express in the presence of his romantic partner? And when is it best for a man to express his deeper emotions within a brotherhood? Is there a distinction there for you?
Yeah, great questions. So I'll just come back to Carly for a moment. So and I love what you said. I completely resonate and agree. And I would say this: how many gods are there in the Hindu tradition? Thousands, right? Hundreds at least. And even in Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology as well. We may resonate with one god more than the other, but there's a reason why there are many gods, because they depict many aspects of the human self. And so the ego death, the cutting, the rage, that is, if we were to permanently be in that, it wouldn't be a fulfilling life, because we're multi-layered beings. And that is one aspect of our journey. And so I think some of these movements are attaching themselves to this, oh, well, it exists, so this is what we're meant to be, so let's be it in fullness. It's a passage, and a temporal passage at that. So to come to your question, there is a distinction, because in terms of how men express and emote. So we have a limbic system, like women do, and so emoting, I get a little structural and scientific there, neuroscience based, because we are meant to emote. It's part of being human, right? And there is a distortion culturally in how men and women emote, and what's appropriate and what's not. And that's a far longer conversation, but let's just address the question directly. So for me, a man needs to practice his range, his emotional range, with his brothers, with men. That means that he needs to practice, and I don't get too caught up in the new age spiritual language of he gets to practice. He needs to fucking practice his range. He needs to do that in a safe, non-judgmental, compassionate space where other men can hold the intensity of his fucking rage, or his sadness, or his jealousy, or his envy, or whatever it is. And as he explores his range, he will come back to equilibrium after a period of time, come back to his more sovereign self. He will come back into greater mastery of who he is. So he won't then unconsciously leak and spill, either be hyper vulnerable and always in his tears, or hyper aggressive and always protective. He'll know what situation calls for this particular emotion, because he's practiced. And he's practiced in a safe space where men can give him feedback and can hold him without shaming him, can hold his rage. Because maybe his mother shamed him, or his father shamed him, and that's imprinted upon him how delicate he is, and therefore he needs to be rough and ready so that he can mask that delicate side of himself. But can he show that to his brothers? Can he be met with that reverence? There's deep healing that takes. I've been in these spaces for years, working with many. I mean, just in October, I'll be co-leading 500 men. Like I've been in these space. I know what happens when men are able to be themselves for the first time in their lives. They bring back a more equilibrated, grounded version of themselves to their families, to their children, to their wives, to the women in their lives. And they are able to discern. It's not for me to say, oh, you only should, this is where your tempo should be, and this is what you should express in this situation. It's not for me to say that. They're going to figure it out themselves, because they've experienced range. One of the biggest principles I teach for men, for any human being, is find your range in emotional expression. You can only find it in safe spaces. You've got to be intentional. You've got to explore it, and you've got to be willing to face the difficulty, the challenge, the discomfort that comes with exploring that range, and the shame that may be provoked, but then can be healed in the presence of physiological, social, and emotional safety, particularly in other men, the familiarity, especially because so many boys have been hurt by their fathers and have been hurt by other men. The statistics are actually alarming. Like so many boys experience sexual abuse. It's way more than we think. And in fact, it's way more than we think for females as well. And the sexual abuse that those boys experience are usually by the men. So their relationship to men is very, very disconnected. They are struggling to forge relationships to other men, healthy relationships where they can trust. So when they start to integrate trust back into their bodies, they know, yes, there'll be some trial and error, but it won't be as extreme. It won't be as damaging when they show up to their relationships with their women. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. That is brilliant. Um, I wanted to just tap into a little bit of men who are stuck a bit in um, trying to date women from this place of financial affluence and kind of leading with their success, their money, their status, and then realizing that they've been used, or realizing, that this woman wasn't really interested in them. What's that coming from, and how can a man start to address that within himself if he sees that pattern?
Well, if he's leading from that place, a couple of things here. So there's the inputs here are biological and cultural, and so in modern times, when anyone creates wealth, we're essentially collecting resources. And so when men are collecting wealth, status, etc., symbolism like cars and homes and bank accounts that have X amount of money, and watches on their wrist that mean something, they're collecting resources. So they're demonstrating to the world that they are resourceful,
Yeah.
which is attractive to women and attractive to the feminine, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
However, when we lead with that, we're essentially coming from insecurity, because we're devaluing, more often than not, we're devaluing every other character trait that we have, and we're devaluing everything else that we are. And we lack confidence as a result of that, which is not attractive to the feminine. So we are naturally then going to attract women that only find that valuable. So we will attract, we're being shallow, and the women we're attracting are being shallow in their expression. It's not wrong or right. I mean, when I say shallow, I'm not saying it's wrong, or I'm not saying it's right. It's just shallow. It's superficial in relating. It's not, there's no depth there. Now, if you value depth and you yearn for depth, and most of us do actually, because it's intimacy that we crave, it's being seen, it's this healing, deep healing that comes in that, there's deep expansion that comes in that, with that. If we crave depth and we're attracting shallowness because we're being shallow, because we're not addressing our own insecurities and lack of confidence and inadequacies or perceptions of, then we're going to find ourselves in internal conflict and internal tug of war. And we'll just keep attracting the same kind of situation until we, quote unquote, get it right, change.
Thank you for that. If you don't mind me talking a bit about your relationship, you have a beautiful relationship with a woman who's in similar industry. She's a few years older than you. And I'm noticing this trend among a lot of men in this space of being with women who are just a bit older. Can you tell me a little bit about that, and what you feel you gain from that, if anything?
Yeah, so it's not an intention of mine to date an older woman or be married to an older woman. It happens that's the case. For me, I think what it is that there's a level of maturity that comes with certain life experience, and that's what I crave. So I personally crave that experience in relating, where the chances are, and it's not even chances because I ask very direct questions. We asked very direct questions of each other when we got together, is, what have you moved through in life that really matters? So for example, what is your relationship with your mother? What is your relationship with your father? What is some of the greatest wounds that you, psycho-emotional, psychosocial wounds that you have carried in your life, and how have you dealt with them? And are you still dealing with them? And if so, how? Like really, really going deep into those spaces, like what are your sexual fantasies? What do you crave in terms of having a family? What does that look like? What does define family? Like all the just big questions, right? And I have found in my life that I think you'd agree, I think most of us would agree, like the older we are, and obviously there's a point there, because I don't necessarily want to be with an 80-year-old in an intimate romantic partnership either, right? Because what I was going to say is the older we are, the more life experience we have, especially, well, there's a caveat to that. The caveat is that we're deliberate with how we reflect on our life experience. And that's the inner work. That's being deliberate with our inner work, right? But, we move through certain stages, and we carry a level of maturity. And so for me, I prioritize growth and maturity in relationship, in this kind of relationship. And I guess that for me is the attraction.
Beautiful. My last formal question is, and for any men who are about to be over 40, who are over 40, who are watching, and who don't want to be single anymore, who really feel that they want to be in a relationship but find themselves unable and able to really find that match, what advice would you give to them? What was, or even what was your transformation like from single to coupled life?
Yeah, I completely, maybe completely is not completely accurate, but I very much detached from needing to be in a relationship. I was very content being single.
Mm.
And for a period of time I wasn't open to being in a relationship. And then when I came to the internal conclusion that, oh, I'm open to be in a relationship now, whether it's tomorrow or in 5 years' time, I'm cool because I'm loving my life. Like I'm just living, I'm doing me. I'm doing what I love to do. And I always have, but this time I'm just doing it from a very clean internal place.
Mm.
And so my greatest advice is just keep doing you, like keep enjoying life, keep doing things and being someone that you value and that you revere and respect, and you enjoy your own company. You don't need someone else to fulfill you. You don't need someone else to make you whole. That requires constant, consistent inner work and self-love and building confidence and exploring our edges, and often doing things that, with other people, in other groups that, are challenging for you, that you wouldn't be able to do. Not that you wouldn't be able to do, but it just when you're in when you're in an intimate relationship, you have certain, I don't know if responsibilities is the right word, but the energy attention. It's like, you have a baby. Now, a lot of my energy attention is to this beautiful little girl. So when you get into a relationship, a lot of your energy is in the relationship. Another thing which lends itself to when you are in a relationship, you do want to have your own life. You have to have your own circle of friends. You have to have your own interests and hobbies and values, right? Like it's really, really important. That's why I just say to men, just get really comfortable with who you are and don't be attached to having to be in a relationship. Like your worthiness and your success or your desirability is not based on you being in a relationship. But that's to anyone. It's based on how you see yourself.
Mm. Beautiful. What a wonderful conversation,
Mm,
Stefanos. I hope we get to do this more. This was so fun.
likewise.
And I would love to know a little bit more about what you have coming up. I know you have a special gift for our viewers, which is amazing. If you could share that with us, and then a little bit more about what you have coming up.
For sure. I actually can't remember what the gift is. I think it's the sacred union process.
Yes.
It is, yeah. It's a really beautiful process that my wife and I, Christine, put together. It's an audio. Whether you're in a relationship or not, you can do this as a single. It's really a way to connect deeper, intimately to yourself and to your partner. And we walk you through it. We talk you through it. There's some actual experiential practices that come through for this, and we teach this live as well in like a half day or full day workshop or portions of this. So you're getting a portion of it in like a 60-minute audio, but it's a really beautiful process. That's the gift. And then at the end of this month, September 27th in Austin, Texas, I am putting an event together, which will be a regular event every month. It's a 3 hour. It will move eventually towards 4 hours, but it's a 3 hour immersive. It includes breath work, live coaching, processing, like emotional processing, integration, women only event to help you understand the masculine, to maybe help you heal some wounds and be into deeper recognition, awareness of your relationship to the masculine. We're going to speak to dating dynamics, relating the relationship to our fathers and mothers. Like it's a really beautiful 3 hour immersive, women only. I'm very excited about this. It's been something in the making for many, many years, actually. And I've taught breathwork all around the world to mixed groups and a lot of men, but never actually just women. Well, no, tell a lie. My apologies. I have, but it's been at other people's events, not my actual event. So I'm really, really excited about this. I'm very passionate about it. And it really, just from where I've come from, the journey that I've come from as a man and where I am today. And I'm just really proud of who I've become. And I'm very grateful for the people along my journey that have supported me and have seen me and have chosen not to shame me, and have also called me forward on areas of my life where I could be doing a lot better. And, this event is really an accumulation of so much of that.
Oh, that's so inspiring. I'm so excited for it. I think I want to check it out myself. So,
Hey,
uh,
come. Yeah, I know you're not too far. In New York is not too far.
not at all. And this is also a monthly thing that you're offering. So
Will be,
yeah,
yeah.
so
Yep.
get on it. I'm excited for that, and so grateful for your work and your service,
Thank you.
Stefanos. It's just really beautiful witnessing you, and you're helping so many, and just so grateful for it.
Thank you. I appreciate you very much. I appreciate the conversation as well.
We'll see you all soon.